In children's media, there's a good majority of content where the cast of characters is not human, but instead something anthropomorphic. Whether it be animals, toys, cars, trains, or even planes. This style of media takes something we are familiar with and imbues those things with human characteristics, which some scholars would argue is something natural to us by an early age. In these depictions, some traits are changed somewhat to become more human-like, such as paws or eyes for animals. Though for inanimate things, it means moving or acting in ways that aren't physically possible. Most of the time, this is because they are animated in 3D or 2D animation, which allows for more suspension of disbelief. But what about those done with actual physical models? I present to you Theodore the Tugboat, the descendant of Thomas the Tank Engine and its sister show, Tugs. The two shows that blended the fantasy of anthropomorphism with reality via the use of practical models and sets, creating stories with and about trains and boats respectively for children. I have talked at length about the beauty found in Thomas's use of this medium and how it complements the story and its world. And while there are striking similarities between the two shows, there are important differences we will discuss. Someday I may discuss Tugs more at length because it is also a very lovely show, but others have already covered it more in depth. Theodore the Tugboat centers around the titular character and his friends navigating life lessons found in their home in the Big Harbour, directly based on Nova Scotia's very own harbour in Halifax. We are introduced to the host of the show, the harbour master, played by Mamas and the Papas singer Denny Doherty, who will explain a problem he is dealing with that directly mirrors the conflict of the episode. Now, if you ask me, I would say this guy has a very eventful life, and how he remembers all of these stories for these specific moments is frankly astounding. What's more surreal is that the harbour master represents the only live-action member of the entire show, or any human element at all, since unlike Thomas the Tank Engine, there are no drivers or workers in the tugboat segments to interact with the characters. As for the tugboat segments, yes, that's what I'm going to call them, each story will focus on one of the main cast members facing a new or difficult situation with recurring or secondary characters. The show retains a very gentle tone, and most conflict is resolved in a more idyllic way, with most characters learning their lesson and prioritizing understanding. This gentle approach is augmented by Doherty's narration, as if he is reading a bedtime story, as well as the soothing, synthesized score performed by Graham Shaw. Both of these factors complement the aesthetics of the show beautifully and coincide with each moment to give a wholesome and cohesive experience.
Going out on the ocean. He had often dreamed of sailing out on the open ocean and seeing the world. And he was just a small tugboat, and the ocean seemed so large.
In this video, I would like to discuss the value of Theodore the Tugboat and why it should be talked about more, discussing the world the show develops as well as the themes it presents. To do this, I will throw in some comparisons to its predecessors, Thomas and Tugs, to analyze how effective it is in its goals and utilizing the elements of tugboat and harbor culture. Finally, as I have done before with Thomas the Tank Engine, I would like to analyze why we anthropomorphize these things and why that matters for this show in particular. But before we go in depth on these things, let's start with some of the history of Theodore the Tugboat. The show was conceptualized by one Andrew Cochrane, a former TV journalist in Canada who originally told stories to his 3-year-old son of tugboats in the harbour. And approaching this as a Thomas fan, the similarity to Wilbert Audrey telling his son about railway engines is kinda uncanny. Couple this with the fact that Cochrane would go on to have Robert Cardona direct the show, and the similarities to Thomas the Tank Engine start to seem endless. Speaking of Robert Cardona, for those unfamiliar, he was the co-founder of Clearwater Features with David Mitton, with whom they worked on the first 2 seasons of Thomas and Friends and then Tugs before Cardona went on to Theodore. So if you were wondering, this is why the aesthetics are so similar. And from the interview I've watched, it is clear that he was very passionate about making this show, and I would say it definitely paid off. The Canadian children's show eventually aired on CBC in 1993, later airing on American television channels PBS and Cubo, and honestly, shout out to anyone here who remembers Cubo. You're a real one. The show would go on for 5 seasons until its cancellation in 2001, with 130 episodes total produced, although curiously, only 70 aired on television and 35 went to DVD release. Don't ask me how this happened. My research only went so far. Thankfully, with the advent of YouTube and a lot of dedicated fans, you can find all the episodes online, albeit with variable quality. From the beginning, Theodore nestled into its formula quite nicely, and hey, if it works, it works. Even when I binged all the episodes back to back, it never felt horribly stale, since the harbor master segments felt comforting, and the tugboat segments always had something novel to experience. I think this is thanks to the experience Cardona and his team brought over from his previous work and the writers who worked with them. While we mentioned some of the similarities it has to his predecessors, Theodore takes a different approach to the life of a tugboat by focusing more on the emotional driven stories and not always on the technical aspects. For example, since the tugs have no drivers, they move freely, and from a writing standpoint, they move without regard for what is likely proper tugboat protocol so as to make their movements more human-like, which I'm not counting as a bad thing. In the behind-the-scenes video, provided to YouTube by the Tugboat's Landing channel, many interviews with the crew reiterate this point. Jeff Rosen, the executive producer on the show, explains it well.
On the surface, it's tugboats and bell buoys and bridges, but these characters, for everybody involved, are children. The stories are about children. These tugs are like kids to us.
To me, this perfectly encapsulates what sets Theodore apart from its sister shows. Its focus on imagination rather than accuracy. Cardona himself supports this.
The style that we have here, I think, is much more imaginative, because the characters, for instance, the little faces there, we have a combination of something like 30 or 40 expressions if we wanted to.
This element of the faces and models may echo that of his previous work, but the model work done by Fred Allen offers a completely iconic style you can only find here. Every model was scratch-built using plastic, fiberglass, and perspex, with little things like the tug's hats made of plastic or other characters out of bits and bobs. Albeit simple, every character was made to be unique with individual faces and details. Every tug, for example, has an individual nose shape, something I noticed over time. This includes each ship that comes into the harbor. Every barge, every buoy, and heck, even the docks are all uniquely made. What was paramount to Cardona was making these models as expressive as possible, through aesthetics as well as movement. In that same interview, Cardona elaborates on a time working on the show where he did 20 takes on just one shot of Theodore turning a corner to get it just right, just to make it seem like Theodore was expressing a certain emotion. This was how dedicated Cardona was to his craft, and he gave his all to creating a complete and immersive world and complementing the direction each project took. This is also thanks to his over 60 crew members who brought this world to life, and especially Andrew Cochran, who spearheaded this whole operation. With Theodore's success reaching worldwide acclaim, Cochran's ambition grew stronger, and decided to make the most of it by investing in merchandise and take-home media, such as DVD and VHS. Again, shout out to the people who remember VHS. Unfortunately, this likely caused a great deal of strain on the production of the show, as trying to get merchandise to store shelves proved to be expensive. And although this strategy had clearly helped and straight up kept other children's shows alive, it seemed no matter what he tried, Cochran and Theodore couldn't come back from it. Things only got worse with the sudden tragedy of 9/11, absolutely tanking international trading and leading to the cancellation of Theodore Tugboat after 5 seasons. Plans for a spin-off series based around the character of Pugwash, introduced in the final season, also fell through with the main series. This, as well as the construction of the famous Theodore 2, which we'll get into later, left Cochran Entertainment bankrupt by 2002. Okay, I'm trying not to make a habit of this, but it's crazy how this was just about the same time Ghislaine, who owned Thomas at the time, sold to Hit Entertainment. The parallels are just adding up here, I swear. And thus, the Theodore Tugboat name was tossed around a number of different companies and ended up in the hands of NBC Universal in 2016. As of now, nothing has come of it. On a lighter note, let's talk about the museum. In 1999, 6 years after the show's inception, the Maritime Museum of Halifax, one of the landmarks actually featured on the set of the show, took the opportunity to put models used in the show on display. I think this is such a special connection to the real world the show has to its name. Besides Theodore 2. And while the show may be long over, you can still go to this museum and see the models themselves in the cases with placards holding information on each one of them. Unfortunately, not all of the models are on display, being either held in storage or having never been returned to the museum, like Pugwash, who was taken out to be used for her spin-off show. However, since it never ended up happening, the model never came back, and we don't know why. Now, on to the moment we've all been waiting for, the rather large and tugboat-shaped elephant in the room. Probably Theodore Tugboat's largest claim to fame and most defining legacy, the construction of the massive Theodore 2.
Yeah! Yeah!
a life-size recreation of the titular character created to actually work in the water. The production was spearheaded by Andrew Cochran himself through his company Cochran Entertainment in its final years, utilizing the help of Fred Allen, who designed the original character and prop, as well as the naval architect Marius Lenkeek of Lenkeek Vessel Engineering. I'm so sorry if I butchered that name. And it was built at Snyder's Shipyard in Dayspring, Nova Scotia. After the diligent work put into its construction, Theodore 2 first hit the water in April 2000 with Andrew Cochran and the harbor master himself, Denny Doherty, on board. And so set sail the most incredible piece of memorabilia for a children's show ever seen. While Theodore 2 has seen many sights, it spent most of its life in Nova Scotia, right outside the Maritime Museum, providing tours for many people and fans of the show. In 2020, however, things would take a dramatic turn, since Ambassadors, the owner of the vessel at the time, announced they would be selling Theodore 2 for about $500,000 Canadian dollars. For a while it seemed hopeless that anyone would be able to buy them out. I mean, how many people have $500,000 Canadian dollars lying around?
Put your hands down, for God's sakes! Put them down now!
Unless you're a really dedicated Theodore fan. But in 2021, one Blair McKeel purchased the vessel for use in collaboration with Swim Drink Fish, a water education and conservation advocacy group, in order to promote preservation of the Great Lakes. To this day, Theodore now resides in Hamilton Harbour by Lake Ontario. So at least that's one happy ending, right? Also, shout out to Splinky922 for collecting this information and documenting it in a very well-made video, which goes into way more depth on all of this history of the show. So please go watch it. It is so insightful. Now that we've covered just about all the background for the show and we understand a little of the mindset the creators had in the production process, I think now is the best time to really start delving into what I love about this show. And what better way to begin than talking about Theodore 2's basis himself, Theodore, more specifically his character. Being the main character of the show, many of the episodes center around a problem Theodore is facing and how he learns to deal with it. He embodies your typical protagonist traits, as he is more often than not found with a very sunny disposition, seeking to make friends with anyone, and works hard. Out of the main tugs, Theodore can often be a voice of reason, and is actually quite clever. In many stories, he helps to resolve the conflict by putting the pieces together or thinking of a good solution. One of the best stories to show this is Theodore and the Queen, where Theodore uses his quick thinking to save the ocean liner from collapsing a bridge. Still, Theodore is a child at heart who partakes in plenty of silliness and games with his friends. Not to mention, he is far from perfect. So while he finds many solutions, his naivete is also the cause of many of the problems he faces. Nonetheless, Theodore encapsulates everything a protagonist needs to engage viewers in his world. Most times when we follow Theodore, there is a good chance his best friend Hank is there with him. Being even younger than Theodore, Hank has the least experience out of all the tugs. So whenever he is doing big jobs, he is still only learning. His innocence can often result in mishaps and confusion, but it is also very sweet and humorous for everyone. This isn't to say that Hank is the butt of every joke, although he does sometimes take the underdog role. The tugs still care for him and recognize him as family, like in Hank and the Hug. Even though Hank can be funny in the way that he doesn't understand things, he is also naturally a very comical character and can get anyone to laugh by making a silly face or noise. While Hank may not be the brightest or experienced, I believe he holds in him the soul of the group, with a fresh face to meet them.
And fresh was the only word he could think of just then.
Now, on to the big tugs. Emily is a fascinating character to me because there's not one role you can assign her to. She can just as easily go from passionate and headstrong protagonist to a thoughtful and curious secondary. To Theodore, she is like a big sister character who is looked up to for her wisdom and experience, and she is a V-tug, a very important status for a tug, and can go out on the ocean. Because of this, she enjoys going to harbors all across the world and learning about different cultures, picking up other languages, and meeting new ships. The episode Emily the Vigorous spotlights this love of culture when she tries her hardest to meet a Russian trawler amidst a busy workday. On the flip side, one character that challenges this love of meeting new ships is Carla the cabin cruiser, who seems exciting for Emily at first until she starts taking dangerous risks. So we see Emily stand by her values and not give in to peer pressure. This is also exemplified by her relationship with Constance, the Coast Guard ship, after she speaks up for herself. All of these traits make Emily one of the strongest characters in the show and one of the most well-rounded. One thing I will mention is that both the wiki and the show make mention of the fact that she's the only female tug in the main group, and it even becomes the focus of the episode Emily and the Tug of War, where she's excluded from playing games just because she's a girl. I'm sorry, but what a strange problem to have as tugboats. To me, I feel like Emily is strong enough as a character to not be defined by her gender. So a moment like this just comes out of nowhere for me, and I think takes away from the fact that she could carry the show as a protagonist if the writers so chose. Now, as an almost direct contrast to Emily, and really just a standout from the rest of the cast in general, is George. Alright, now before you say anything, I'm not saying George is a bad character at all, only that he's a pretty straightforward one. He is another one of the V-Tugs, and also the most confident, the loudest, and the strongest of the main tugs. So he's often boasting to them or arguing about something. At this point you can guess how easily this results in being the main conflict in a George-centric episode. But while you might dismiss George as just some pompous archetype,
oh please,
he does have a good heart underneath it all. We talked about Emily and the Tug of War because of its out-of-the-blue gender commentary, but we didn't talk about how George was sexist? Yeah, not really a fan of this plot point, but it informs us of the role he fulfills in the show. It tells me that the writers could really picture him as some big brother type from maybe their own childhood, whose pride steps on a lot of toes. Thankfully, as with any of the issues in the show, George learns his lesson and will apologize afterwards. This isn't even mentioning his own internal struggles, like in George's funny noise, where he gets upset and embarrassed when the funny noise he makes gets him laughed at by the others, undermining the strong image he envisions for himself. He eventually comes to terms with the idea that he can laugh at himself and be just a little more vulnerable around his friends. While he's sometimes rough around the edges, George is still there for his fellow tugs, like in Theodore and the Bully, where George sticks up to a tug even bigger than him for Theodore, proving that despite his faults, he is a good friend. And now, last but certainly not least, the Big Harbor's very own safety tug, Foduck. Now just in case you're wondering, Andrew Cochran has stated that his 3-year-old son made up the name Foduck, and even he doesn't know what it means, so I don't know what to tell you. Being the only harbor safety tug comes with a lot of responsibility, and Foduck takes that role very seriously, working tirelessly to ensure the harbor is kept secure. He is also quite knowledgeable, and not just because of the technology he is equipped with, like his sonars and hoses, he actually knows a lot about science and how the world works. He is known to keep the tugs in order as somewhat of a stickler for the rules. Nonetheless, he is still a solid friend who indulges in games and good fun, like spraying the tugs with his fire hose on hot days, or maybe even not so hot days. Foduck is the pragmatist of the group, who offers explanations for most anything, and is actually the only tug we see gain his V-word on screen, and we actually get to see how this affects him. It is rare that we get to see the emotional side to Foduck, but when we do, it stands out just a little more in episodes like Foduck's Hurt Feelings, a pretty straightforward title, and Foduck and the Rainbow, which both deal with him going through scenarios where things don't go his way, or as expected, making him upset. He sits somewhere in the middle of the other tugs since he has mature qualities like the other V-tugs, but is still young like the harbor tugs. And at his core, Foduck is a true friend, always ready to help. With such a colorful cast, and we haven't even talked about the supporting cast, let's discuss the writing that brings them to life. For those of us familiar with Thomas the Tank Engine, the writing style here is pretty similar, since of course there is a narrator and the story we hear is told completely by him, allowing for beautiful and descriptive language to set up the scene.
The first fingers of sunlight fell upon the sleeping tugs and tickled them awake.
I think it also connects the viewer to the story when we see the harbor master talk to us face to face. We get to know the person who is telling this story, and so when he tells it to you, it feels more intimate. This is, of course, I think, due to Doherty's performance, which I can't compliment enough because he'll make certain noises or ad-libs to make the lines or the story sound more natural, rather than follow the words to the letter. The writing itself is super digestible for any audience. Each plot never fails to get its message across effectively and make each personal dilemma have weight to it. There's plenty of variety in each season, and the writers don't limit themselves to certain characters or topics. I decided on a few episodes I wanted to highlight to illustrate this point, and I would also suggest these episodes for anyone interested in watching the show. I mean, I wouldn't say I'm the expert giving you the best episodes to start with or anything, but I think these ones capture some of the best moments from the show for sure. Some of these I just mentioned in the character discussions, but I want to expand on them here. So first we have Theodore and the Queen, a nice introduction to Theodore and the cast as well as Theodore's problem-solving skills. When Theodore and the rest of the tugs attend their daily morning meeting, the dispatcher tells them there is important work ahead of them. Theodore jokes that it's almost as if the Queen was coming. Turns out he was right. Wipe that smile right off his face. But when they go to bring her in, she gets caught on Benjamin Bridge because the tide was too high. Though why they decided she would ever go onto that bridge is beyond me. We get to see Theodore's problem solving firsthand, as well as being faced with some of the pushback from George and the others, as they all scramble for a solution. After some debris from Benjamin splashes water into his hull, Theodore realizes that to save the queen, they need to lower her in the water, and through quick thinking, the tugs get everything in place to save her. The moral that the small is just as important as the big is one that is often taught, but I love the way it's done, to show that Theodore isn't better than anyone or has something the others don't, because as he tells the others his idea, they are quick to understand. It showcases the personality of the show, from the banter between the characters to the community that livens the harbor. It's also pretty suspenseful, since someone really could be hurt in this scenario. By the end, Theodore's reward feels earned, and you get the sense that he truly belongs here. The next episode I'd like to highlight is Hank and the Hug. Now, this is definitely one of those episodes that focuses more on the emotional conflict than the practical ones like we saw just before, but that is one of its strengths. Now, I think we've all had one of those days where it seems like no one wants to do what you want to do, or listen to you, or even likes you. Well, that's what Hank was dealing with in this episode, and I gotta say, it really came through. After the other tugs opt out of doing anything Hank wants to do that morning because either they're too tired, too busy, or just not in the mood, Hank gets to a boiling point and yells out to the whole harbor, raising the concerns of all the tugs. What is most surprising is that after he blows his stack, he completely shuts down. And after everyone asks him what's wrong, he simply replies,
Nothing, replied Hank quietly. I just want to be by myself.
And honestly, this feels like the most realistic part of the conflict. I don't know about you guys, but even today, I sometimes find myself feeling the same way and not talking to other people when I should and when I need it. So after much persistence, the tugs can't get through to Hank no matter what. So Theodore conjures up the idea to, well, if you guessed by the episode title, hug it. I'm not gonna lie, this episode made me feel what is scientifically known as warm and fuzzy. This episode really takes the approach Jeff Rosen and Cardona pitched in the beginning of treating the tugs as children, and commits to it. As I watched this, it truly felt like Hank's feelings were made to be valid, and the other tugs have some pretty natural reactions, like getting impatient, even though they're trying their best to help him in their own ways, which makes the resolution all the more satisfying when they all come together as a family, even if realistically tugs don't hug. But I don't care. I love it. The next story I want to highlight is actually a two-parter. I say two-parter because despite nothing in the titles indicating anything, the episode George Buzzes the Dock directly preludes the Great Harbor Cleanup Contest. What I like about this story is that it takes the premise of an environmental awareness message and utilizes the fact that the story is about tugs to its advantage. Like, yeah, the tugs would seriously care about the state of the beach, or be more conscious of how much smoke they make from their stacks. I admire the fact that we take the personal problem the tugs have with George being loud and splashing the dock and naturally progress it so that it's a message where the tugs realize they all do wasteful things and they can all work on it. I think this two-parter demonstrates the series at one of its strongest points by making the characters believable and relatable, as well as making the conflict one that pertains to tugboats and people alike. It takes the premise of the tugs as children and uses it to complement the subject matter so they can learn about it as we do. The last story I want to look at is probably my favorite episode of all, Bedford's Big Move. For this episode, we shift the spotlight to one of the minor cast members, Bedford the bellbuoy, someone you'd assume really doesn't add too much to the world aside from a little color. But if you watched my Bekoff video, you'd know that's not the case. I mean, the life of a bellbuoy isn't terribly exciting. Sitting in one spot all day, every day, ringing your bell, watching the world go by. And that's just how Bedford felt. When Theodore comes by to talk about his day as usual, it becomes a little difficult for Bedford to listen when more exciting things are calling for Theodore's attention. Even when Theodore takes the chance to take Bedford around the harbor to visit everyone, watching as Theodore has to decline every other exciting opportunity, Bedford comes to a decision to leave the harbor.
Leave the harbor, repeated Bedeck.
When Theodore finds out, he is crushed. So he and every other member of the Big Harbor come to see him off. And just when it seems like Bedford is about to go, Theodore stops him to tell him straight out,
We love you.
We love you. And as cheesy as it may seem, that's all Bedford needed to hear to know that this is his home. And you know what? I'm not afraid to admit it. This episode makes me emotional. Like, super emotional. Like no other episode, not even Thomas. Whether it's from the heart-wrenching music or the simple but effective expressions conveying the subtle sadness or the incredible voice of Denny Doherty perfectly capturing the delicate nature of the moment, I would say this episode gets everything right for a Theodore Tugboat story. So if my trite words don't do it justice, please just watch it for yourself and give it some love. Having pointed towards just a few of the episodes I feel really helped to define the show, I would like to conclude this section by saying just what I think the writing does so right. If I haven't said it enough already, I really appreciate the emotional weight each problem gets, no matter how small it is, or in Bedford's case, how small the character is. It makes the show more sincere in its presentation, and combining it with the gentle storytelling gives the show a comforting vibe, something that can easily be enjoyed in your downtime for relaxation. If we were to compare the character interactions to that of early Thomas, or even Tugs, Theodore takes a more idyllic approach to its dialogue, where there's not an abundance of teasing or rudeness in every character, but there is still banter to be found. Usually every disagreement is meant to be a setup for a resolution for the story, but I would argue it's not as egregious as something like a preschool show where they have to spell out every single message for you and paint every mean thing or rude thing as unequivocally bad. There's still nuance here. And since we're discussing the strengths of the show, I simply must highlight the music and visuals, which work in tandem to elevate Theodore from just another kid's show about tugboats and make it a beautiful experience. In Tugboat's Landings interview with him, Graham Shaw goes into how he composed each episode as sort of a jam session done with a computer, a keyboard, and synth pads. He creates each score live, playing alongside the episode, just feeling out each scene and reacting with his sounds.
He started slowly, but soon he moved faster and faster. Wait a minute, Hank called. I think they're gone. He stopped. He smiled. Then, yeah, came a huge hiccup.
As Shaw says, the synths he uses are meant to emulate the ocean from how their sounds ebb and flow, with a very ethereal sound that, for me, creates such a serene experience, especially when paired with the visuals from the ocean. To add to the versatility, Shaw also incorporates many genres of music, from the jazzy theme for Carla the Cabin Cruiser to the elegant strings for the Queen, or the reggae-inspired theme for the iconic theme song. And yeah, let's just take a second to appreciate the incredible theme song that opens each episode with its simple but catchy lyrics, to the peppy and nautical melody and the enthusiastic rhythm that keeps you engaged. Among the many great qualities of the show, the music remains a timeless treasure for anyone to enjoy. While the music's dynamics swell and soften from scene to scene, the visuals bring a stillness that centers each moment. If we're talking about the camera work, then it is very static most of the time, aside from the occasional panning shot, but I think it works rather well for the tone of the show. I say stillness because I think that's really the key word if we were to define the visuals here, from not just the camera work, but the actual setting as well. I adore looking at shots that are almost entirely blue because of the sky and ocean meeting in the middle, with maybe a tug or two traveling between. Maybe it's not as complex as Cardona's other works in terms of scenery, but I love the simplicity because of the vibrant colors and open composition. One thing I especially love is seeing the reflection of the water ripples shine on the faces of the tugs in certain shots. It's such a small detail, and yet it feels so right for this show. However, the sets are still festooned with detail that make it feel so alive, despite us not getting to see all of it. So now that we've talked about what I love about the show as well as its strengths, it's only right that we bring up the weaknesses. I think the biggest discrepancy is how much of the real world is actually in Theodore. And to best illustrate this issue, I think it's necessary we talk about the Blue Nose problem. Blue Nose is another minor character who appears very infrequently in the show as a resident of the Big Harbor and friend to Theodore. The complicated thing about Blue Nose is she's real. Yeah, like a real, actual boat, which in and of itself is not a problem, but it does raise some questions. And I'm not even talking about who the heck drives her. The confusion lies in how the character of Blue Nose is, without a doubt, a love letter to Nova Scotia heritage. So says Silver Donald Cameron, the writer of the episode she's introduced, who wanted to include the character of Blue Nose in the first place. And while I would agree that this heritage is incredibly important for the show, I only wish they did more with it. I would say the trouble this show has in its pursuit of approaching the tugs as children who happen to have bumpers is that it means you'll find episodes where the tugs talk and act pretty much as people do, facing a problem that could happen to anyone. Episodes like Best Friends come to mind, which is probably one of the weakest episodes in my opinion, simply because the only thing that happens in it is Theodore telling his friends they're his best friend, and then when they get upset because they all think he's their best friend, then he just says, well, we're all best friends, and that's it. Okay, I know this is a season 1 episode, so the writers were probably still trying to find their footing, but this is a problem I feel does come up a few times. Sometimes the fact that they are tugs is incidental, but sometimes they experience things as only tugs could. When you have characters like Blue Nose show up, and then we see children on the beach, just for one episode, or have the tugs honk outside the harbor master's window, only to never have him show up in their segments, it calls into question just how this all works. Moreover, it makes it harder to define the identity of Theodore Tugboat as a show about tugboats. I could go on with all the sort of nitpicks I have, but my main point here is that, as well as Stephen claims, the imagination loses vitality as it ceases to adhere to what is real. With all of these shows, whether it's Thomas or Tugs or Pixar's Cars or Toy Story, we as viewers must stretch our imaginations somewhat, but in the world we are indulging in, there has to be some rules for us to follow or else we disconnect from it. Now, having discussed the literary value of Theodore Tugboat, let's dig into why we've been looking at anthropomorphic tugboats this whole time. The term anthropomorphism is derived from the Greek anthropos for human and morph for shape. But since we're talking about tugboats here, you can't quite squint your eyes to make the two look alike. Instead, I'd like to look at what the benefits are for us as viewers when we connect to inanimate things. In order to do that, let's hear from actual experts who know what they're talking about. Veronique Servais, I hope I said that right, stated in her article, anthropomorphism is better defined as a way to perceive or create patterns that connect people with animals and make them relevant according to the current activity. We as people love to find patterns in things. It's in our very nature to connect to others, so we extend that to other things as well. We can trace the very concept of anthropomorphism to early civilization, where you'll find it in most folk tales and mythology, such as the Lowenmensch statue. If we are to understand the second part of that statement, the fact that we project ourselves into objects or creatures tells us that we find something attractive about them. Personally, one of my favorite songs from Thomas the Tank Engine was always It's Great to Be an Engine, because as a kid, I really did want to be an engine after watching all the adventures they would go through, and I imagine it's the same for anyone on the team of movies like Lion King or Zootopia who imbue themselves into those worlds. Looking at all the media out there, you're more likely to find animals as protagonists than engines or tugboats. According to some, this is due to many human traits and attributes being represented by these animals in line with their actual or natural modes of existence. For instance, sheep are frequently employed as a metaphor for gentle people, since they are thought of as calm, placid animals. Ultimately, in order to stress what is important about humans, animals are employed to showcase human character. This quote then begs the question, why anthropomorphize tugboats? In my second video on this channel, Why Do We Like Thomas the Tank Engine, I made the case that we as humans enjoy personifying steam engines because of things like their steam acting like breath, and their sheds sort of like beds to sleep in. With tugboats, it's a little different. They also blow steam out of their smokestacks and rev their engines, and when they're done with work for the day, they rest at their dock. However, unlike steam engines, they're allowed much more movement to express themselves with. They spin when they're excited or turn away when they're mad or upset, and they can even bump or nuzzle each other, depending on the day. From an interview done by Blake Crash Priddle with Andrew Cochran himself, he describes the inspiration of these stories as seeing the wheelhouses of the tugs at Halifax as faces, and imagining what they would be saying to each other or what stories they could tell. And this is something we all do. Whether we talk to our dogs or give voice to our toys, we just as easily see faces in headlights of cars or smoke boxes on steam engines. So it is just as reasonable to see the same in tugboats. But what is it about tugboats or boats in general that appeal to us? Whatever I watched or listened to about this show, there was no definite answer. So I guess I'll just take a shot at it myself. To me, the appeal in watercraft, big or small, lies in the mystique of life on the water itself. The visual of getting to float on the water is an incredible one, when you think about it, and it's something we've all imagined at some point or another, and seeing as how actually moving your body in the water is so different and difficult, it makes the idea of gliding freely through the water all that more appealing. Add to this the intricacies of each craft from smokestack to bumper, and we have ourselves an attention-grabbing subject. And for a television show, that is the best thing. After all, as Brian Boyd says, Attention is the very life of art. It is through the appealing premise of tugboats, which lend themselves well to personification in their shape, that Cochrane and his team were able to create a fantastic world filled with the many facets of harbor life, while imbuing emotional elements for the audience. Boyd goes on to say, skilled storytellers secure our attention by appealing to our cognitive craving to comprehend the actions and intentions of others, while serving their own aims, both through the attention they garner and through appealing to interests that we either share or can be made to think we share with them. If we take any episode we discussed earlier, there is always something we as viewers can connect to. So while we are hooked by our enjoyment of boats or life on the water, what we truly love about these stories is the heart and soul found in the characters, something Theodore understands no matter what. And so we come to my final question. What is the significance of Theodore Tugboat? In my analysis of Thomas the Tank Engine, I concluded that it was Wilbert Awdry's passion for railways as a whole that brought the world of Thomas and Friends to the forefront of the cultural zeitgeist, and that his passion inspired others to become invested in not only the world of Thomas, but the world of railways altogether. Similar to Awdry, Andrew Cochrane clearly made this show his world, bringing in elements of his personal life, like his own children, who named the tugs. Although it seems to me that harbour life wasn't exactly his passion, like railways were to Awdry, I think Cochrane makes up for this with the crew he surrounds himself with. Mostly fellow residents of Halifax, who offer their own identity, or with other members like Denny Doherty, who grew up by the sea in Canada, or Robert Cordona, an expert director who already had experience with this kind of show before. What I think makes Theodore so unique in this regard is that, like the Big Harbour itself, the production would not have been possible without the efforts of the collective. Having many voices instead of one gives Theodore Tugboat a variety of elements to work from, for better or for worse. Sometimes this means the focus of the show is on how tugboats would face a problem only as tugboats can, while feeling emotions we recognize, and sometimes it deals with simple problems that could happen to anyone. Some episodes can enlighten us on topics like schooners, a piece of Canadian culture, or teach us about the flags ships use on the sea, while others simply teach us to be kinder to one another. Where Thomas wanted to show us the fantastic world of railways and Tugs wanted to show us the incredible world of the sea, Theodore embraces its fantastic premise to create stories about discovery. It is a show about the relationships we cultivate while we learn about the world around us. The Big Harbour teaches us about different boats, like schooners or cable ships, but it also teaches us the value of community, above all else. In the span of 5 seasons and roughly 130 episodes, for every new thing you learn from the show, you might have already learned another from somewhere else. But what really sets Theodore the Tugboat apart is the feel of the show. The charismatic harbour master welcoming you to every episode, soothing you with his soft-spoken voice, to the clear blues and idyllic aesthetics paired with an incredible score wrapping you in a cozy blanket of safety. Now, if there is any show deserving of the description comfort show, this is it. No matter who you are, everything about this show is designed to make you feel safe and at ease, and it does it incredibly well. With that, I want to thank you all for watching because I really appreciate your support on anything I do. This is something new, so I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, you can do all the usual things, like, subscribe, and if you'd like to comment, let me hear your thoughts on Theodore the Tugboat. Did you grow up watching it like I did? Are you still a fan? All that stuff. Thank you guys so much for watching, I really appreciate it. Stay safe out there.
Well, thanks for visiting us here in the Big Harbour, and we'll see you all again next time. So long.
Now just don't ask me why the bridge can talk.